You, Dave, for those songs today. Good morning to everyone again. We'll be out for a few Sundays here, going to serve at our camp in Wisconsin. So, looking forward to that. I just yesterday finally finished the curriculum for that, so that's kind of a relief to be done with that. And now we're on our way to being ready to go there. It's interesting, in the last several years when you go, the camp session that we serve at is mainly middle schoolers. And I don't have direct evidence for this, but I can imagine what it's like for those kids in the first day or two, because my theory is most of them are on detox right when they get there, because there's no electronics allowed at our camp, and I'm sure that most of them aren't used to living real life, in that way. And I'm sure that at first they say, oh, what am I going to do? How could I, last for 2 weeks without my electronic device, especially ones that have never been there before. But after a while, they experience what we all know, is that it's actually better without it. It's real life, and there's a sense of liberty and freedom, and every once in a while you'll have a kid who kind of mourns the fact when you give them their cell phone back at the end of the session, like, oh yeah, now I have to go back to this way of living. But I think that's a road into the type of thing we're talking about today. The sermon title is Unbound. It's about the freeing, the experience of liberty that this woman in the text experienced because of Jesus. And the text begins here in Luke chapter 13, verse 10. This is a story that's only given to us by Luke in his gospel. You don't find it in any other gospel. It's also the last synagogue story in Luke's gospel. So this is an important one. They're all important, but Luke has some synagogue stories, and this is the last one. And it's a story that's unique to Luke. So this fits the things that he's trying to say and underscore in his gospel, and we'll try to figure out why here as we read. We read the text this morning here, but we'll go through it again real quick here. He was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. There was a woman who for 18 years had a sickness caused by a spirit, and she was bent double and could not straighten up at all. And when Jesus saw her, he called her over and said to her, "Woman, you are freed from your sickness." And he laid his hands on her, and immediately she was made erect again and began glorifying God. So, this woman was in a physical position that I am not sure I can do myself, but it's an extremely difficult and painful one, and she's been in it for 18 years, bent over, not just bent over, but bent over double. And it's a very difficult position to be in, and to try to navigate the first century Palestinian world in this position. And she is, even in her state, a faithful synagogue goer, and she's there, and Jesus is there, and she obviously would like to experience the freedom, but she's not approaching Jesus with it. The reason that she's there is to worship and glorify God. But that's also the reason that Jesus is there. And Jesus sees her and he calls her over to him, and he frees her. He sees her, and then he frees her, lays his hands on her, and she begins to stand up erect. And that's a beautiful story, and it makes total sense. And of course, this is who Jesus is, and this is what he wants to give to a woman like this. But not everyone, of course, was a fan of it. And that's why this story is here. It's hard for us to imagine. Why would anyone have a problem with this, isn't it? Why would anyone make a big deal or big fuss about this? But the synagogue official, and we're familiar enough with these Sabbath controversies to know, and this is a text that you would expect Jesus to say something like, the Sabbath was made for humans, not humans for the Sabbath. And it's a text like that, although that phrase doesn't occur in this one. But the synagogue official, verse 14, indignant because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath, began saying to the crowd in response, there are 6 days in which work can be done, so come during them and get healed. Don't come on the Sabbath day. Don't come on the Lord's day to be healed. But the Lord answered him, and he said, you hypocrites. He's talking to the guy, but he says hypocrites plural. That means there's other people like the synagogue ruler in this crowd. You hypocrites, isn't it the case that every Sabbath you go out and untie your ox or your donkey from the stall and lead that animal to water? Unbind, loosen your animal to lead him to water. Verse 16, but in this woman, who is not an ox or a donkey, she's a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has bound for 18 long years. Should not she be released from that bondage on the Sabbath day? That's Jesus' question. He says, you care about your animals and treat them better than you do this woman. You don't care about the Sabbath. You do this kind of stuff on the Sabbath. You know how to take care of the life of your animal on the Sabbath. You're just using that as an excuse. Because you know that on the Sabbath, even on the Sabbath, you want to make sure that your animal has life, has water. And you'll unbind that animal, you'll loosen them, you'll free them and take them to that water. But you're not interested in this woman, this daughter of Abraham, experiencing that same life, even a greater life. The woman has been unbound. The woman has been set free. She's been released from this. She's experiencing the freedom that God has longed to give her. But we miss the point if we think that the story is just about the woman. It is the story of one person becoming unbound, set free, and the story, unfortunately, of someone else who remains in bondage, remains bound. And Jesus longs to free that person too, for them to know the freedom that this woman now knows. But the synagogue ruler isn't interested in that. And I think that kind of hits at part of the key of why Luke is telling this story. He's telling this story, giving it to the church, because he knows it is possible that we can become like the synagogue ruler, that we can miss the point of what we're doing, that we can remain in bondage to some extent for various reasons. We could do that individually. There are places in our life, maybe most of our lives, if we really take the time to let the light of God search within us, that there are places where we remain bound, where God wants to give freedom, but we're not comfortable enough to receive it. I remember when I was in college, and I've told you guys before that I've struggled really bad with depression over the years. And I remember being in college, and I finally went to one of the professors there to do some therapy session for depression. And we talked about it and stuff, and he was interested in me trying this medication for depression. And I remember at that moment being scared to take it. I knew that this was a possible agent, catalyst for freeing me from depression. But I was so scared to do it because I didn't know who I would be without depression. It's really strange. But I was scared. My identity was so intertwined with this psychology of depression that was a part of me. I didn't know who I would be if I wasn't that. And I was afraid this was going to strip me of my identity, even though this thing that is keeping me in bondage, this thing that is this power over me. I was afraid to be set free from it because I didn't know what there was on the other side of it, and I was afraid. And it's counterintuitive, but when you're sitting in the place of bondage, it is a legitimate fear. I think that there's a way that this synagogue official could be experiencing something similar. He probably knows in his heart of hearts, I know that this whole enterprise, this whole thing that we do is about God giving life and freedom. I know that. I'm the ruler of the synagogue. And these other people that are in charge with me, they know that too. I know that. But if I really give into that, if I really say and start living out this reality, I'm afraid of what might be on the other side of that. I don't know. My identity is so intertwined with the minutia and the rules and the order and all of this that it's kind of scary to actually be about the work of freedom, of being unbound. That's the synagogue official. But it might be some of us too. This is the most important thing to us in our lives. Our faith, our Christian family, what we do together in ministry. This is the most important thing. And it can be scary to venture into areas of freedom sometimes. I know it can be. I have the same fears as everyone else. But Luke knows there's a risk, there's a danger that when the church becomes established, that these things, that we can become focused and about the wrong priorities and have them in the wrong order. And not have as our priority the freedom, the unbinding of people. That's what these assemblies, that's what our church family is about. It's about the freedom of Christ coming into the lives of people. I mentioned some months or so ago an author and Dr. Ian McGilchrist. And I mentioned his groundbreaking studies on the human brain. And when I was growing up, the popular teaching at the time was you have a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere of your brain. That's still true. But there were major distinctions made between the two. Like your left hemisphere is about this and that, and your right hemisphere does this and that. And then over time, over the decades, those kind of became disproven and fell out of favor. And so then the new teaching was, well, all of your brain does all the stuff together. Okay? There wasn't this big dichotomy and difference between the hemispheres. Well, Ian McGilchrist's research says actually there actually are important differences between left hemisphere and right hemisphere of your brain. They're not the ones that we used to say, but there are differences, and they're important differences. In fact, he says that it's so important, and if we get it wrong, backwards like we have, then we put ourselves in great risk as civilization. What does he mean by that? He says that the name of his most famous work is called The Master and His Emissary. He says that one side of our brain, one hemisphere, has always been intended to be the master, the one in charge. And that the other side, the left side, was always intended to operate in service of the master, the right hemisphere. And both of them are equally important. We need both, but there's one that's supposed to be in charge, and there's one that's supposed to be the emissary, and that we've gotten that backwards. Let me show, I have like 5 pages of notes here. I'm not going to do all that, but I'll just tell you a little bit of some of the things, the distinctions between the two. The left hemisphere of our brain, well, I'll go with the right hemisphere first. The right hemisphere is the big picture one. Imagine an animal of prey foraging or something. They have to be totally aware of their entire environment the whole time, right? Because there's predators. So there's this sense that they're using their right hemisphere of their brain to understand the entire landscape and be aware of everything that's happening around them. But there comes a moment where they have to narrow in their focus and focus on a particular small thing and put their entire focus onto that so they can get this berry or this leaf or whatever. And at that moment, they use their left hemisphere to do that. Both of those are very important operations. The right hemisphere is the one that keeps us in touch with the big picture, real life, presence, the thing that we're inhabiting all around us, the real experiences that are coming to us in life. The broadness, the open, sustained, vigilant, looking out at everything, realizing that everything is connected in some way. And this is the hemisphere that's more able that is open to the sacred experiences in life, the higher values in life, the ones that really matter as humans, the ones that engage us in relationship with one another, relationship with God, relationship with creation. That's the right hemisphere, according to McGilchrist. That's the master. That's the one that's supposed to be in charge. But he says over the last few centuries, something has happened. There's been changes and shifts in our culture so that the left hemisphere has become dominant and the one in charge. And he says the left hemisphere is the part, and remember, both these are equally important. We need both. But the left hemisphere is the one that offers a representation of reality, not the reality itself. A representation. Think of that. There's the reality that's coming to me, and then the left hemisphere can represent it in a different way. A different way. By offering a map, or a program, or a theory, or a diagram, or something abstract and categorical, and it's by definition removed from the world that it's mapping, right? This is the left hemisphere. That stuff is really important. But McGilchrist says, however important, it can't be the one in charge. It's something removed from reality. And if we look at the world only in that way, we're missing out. We're not in touch with the actual human experience. The left hemisphere is designed for acquisition, for pleasure, for utility, for getting stuff, for having fun. And it's the one side of the hemisphere that gets a kick out of power. Seeking power, having power, keeping power. The right hemisphere has to do with that which grasps things. Like I said, obtaining food, handling sticks, building a shelter, latching on to something with targeted, full attention and precision. And it says that the world is made up of little bits of things that attract attention. They're isolated, they're decontextualized, they're categorized, abstracted, and lifeless. Okay, so there's value in both of those. We need both. But you can see the point. If you just think about what is a human, and you say, what happens when the left hemisphere dominates a society, a culture? What do they become? They become a people who have a lot of knowledge and understand the minutia and the bits and pieces, and they have a lot of diagrams and charts and maps, but they miss the point of what life is about, the real experience of it, what's actually in front of our faces, to see, to know, to love. And McGilchrist is pointing out a problem that's certainly transferable in some sense to what the synagogue ruler is experiencing. He's missing the point. He thinks, or he's come to let himself think, that synagogue is about the minutia, that Sabbath is about the minutia, the points, the charts, the diagrams. Here's how far you can walk, here's how much food you can carry, here's when you have to do it, and here's why. And he's missing the point of life. Missing the point that there's a woman here who's in bondage and needs to be freed. How do we get to the place where the synagogue ruler is, that we've missed the point and someone's standing in front of us doubled over, but we say, no, Sabbath. Got to do the minutia. Here's the chart, here's the diagram right here. If you wait, then maybe we can help you. It's dangerous to be that way. And it's outside of what Christ wants for us. So I want for us to consider and continue as we have been as a congregation, as we move through Luke's gospel. And again, he's underscoring this thing for us. Where are we bound? Where is it that the Spirit has yet to penetrate and bring life, bring freedom? Lord, help us to recognize those things and to see this church, this congregation, this church family for what it really is, a place that God longs to bring freedom, for us to be unbound. Let's stand and sing.